Okay everyone, so by the time I upload this video, you'll all have heard the big news from Britain. I say from Britain because I'm still in China. I'm making this video from China. The news, of course, is about the death of Baroness Thatcher. Now, from the outset of this video, I want to make it very clear I am not a Tory. And from other videos you will know that I hate a lot of Tory thinking, but this video, if you are a Tory, is not going to be a rant against Toryism per se. I'm going to try and make it quite objective and as balanced as possible for someone who admittedly doesn't like the Tory party, which is an understatement. I hate a lot of Tory thinking, but there's also some aspects of Thatcher's critics I'd like to challenge. So it's huge news, it's heard all over the world. In fact, I found out through one of my Chinese students. The reason it's huge news is quite obvious. Margaret Thatcher was a pivotal figure in the last quarter of the 20th century. She was one of the 20th century's most prominent leaders. Some regard her as Britain's greatest Prime Minister. I certainly don't, but she's definitely one of our most famous Prime Ministers. Up there with Churchill, Attlee, Blair, Disraeli, Gladstone, Palmerston, Lloyd George. I'm talking in terms of fame here. So yes, Margaret Thatcher. Where does one begin? Well, firstly, to think about the negative, Thatcherites hugely underestimate. They're either very cold, desensitized, or just plain ignorant to the fact that this woman did cause an enormous amount of suffering in many parts of the United Kingdom. She did ruin lives, millions of lives, there's no question about that. She destroyed entire communities, and her absolutely ruthless approach on many occasions definitely came across as a deeply cold Machiavellian leader. She was a divisive leader. She stood up for the rich and powerful whilst attacking people who could not defend themselves in many situations, just like Cameron is doing today with his big society, so-called. Thatcherism represented greed, exploitation, and strength of power and money over the poor and people who could not defend themselves. Now, I wasn't around at the 80s, so I can't comment directly about a direct experience, but there's no question that Thatcherism, the legacy of Thatcherism, is still very much felt in Britain today. I believe Cameron definitely has Thatcherite credentials. He's definitely a Thatcherite Prime Minister. You know, the major years are sort of a bit of easing down. Cameron's starting to bring back Thatcherism in a very obvious way. It could be argued that Blair had a lot of Thatcherite qualities as well, but I think Cameron's really showing it with the Tories' war on the unemployed. So I think a lot of contempt for Thatcher in many parts of the United Kingdom is understandable. And Tory critics who dismiss these people, Tories who dismiss these people, should think about the very real suffering that was caused before simply dismissing them. A lot of that anger is frankly justified. Having said that, on the international stage, I give Margaret Thatcher some credit. She was absolutely right to liberate the Falklands. Now, you might argue that was a good political opportunity for her, but Argentina has no moral high ground on the Falklands, and she liberated them. For that, she deserves credit. She also stood up to the tyranny of Soviet Communism and is rightly viewed as an icon of freedom for millions of East Europeans. Let's be quite clear, communism was a brutal and destructive ideology which killed millions of people and enslaved millions of people in the Soviet Union. She stood up to it along with Ronald Reagan, Helmut Kohl, and ultimately the reformer Mikhail Gorbachev, and Pope John Paul II. All those figures were pivotal in that period. Now, one problem I have with a lot of Thatcher critics and by this I mean British socialists, is a totally disregard the pain and suffering on a massive scale that Soviet communism caused, and which Thatcher stood up to. Now, could someone like Jim Callaghan have done that? Could Michael Foot have done it? No, they couldn't. Not in the same way. 20th century communism has rivers of blood. There's no question about it. It was evil. And Margaret Thatcher stood up to it. And for that she deserves credit. On the world stage, her stance on South Africa was absurd. Pretty much backing the apartheid regime there. I think it's very hard to make a video about Thatcher without people assuming that you're going to be one way or the other. I am no Thatcherite, but at the same time I think I'm a bit more open-minded than some of her critics, because I do give her credit for some of those international issues. But domestically, this woman represented everything that is wrong with Toryism, which is the glorification of exploitation, the standing up for the rich and powerful over the downtrodden, and these are vile aspects to Toryism. But you know, oh, by the way, as for the celebrations, I'm not too keen on that. It's not that I'm crying crocodile tears. Anger is very understandable, but those people aren't exactly presenting themselves in a good light. If they sort of have a reserved thing whereby they didn't cry over it and they said they're sort of they don't feel anything that she's gone, that's fine, but to actually hold street parties is, I don't know. I mean, they're acting like it's a surprise. She was an old woman, she was going to die anyway, so it's, I don't know if I agree with that. I personally hate the Tories as well. Sometimes that anger is very real, but I just don't know if celebrating sends out the right message. Celebrating anyone's death, no matter how destructive they may be, because you know, it just sends out the wrong message, and it then plays into Thatcherite hands. Thatcherites believe that all of her critics are mindless thugs, mindless socialist thugs. Now, what I absolutely resent is this idea that you have to be a socialist or very red to hate Thatcherism, or you have to be a Thatcherite to be anti-communist. I hate communism. I also hate Toryism. Now, why can't I take that position? I believe both are destructive ideologies. Communism, oh by the way, those comparing Margaret Thatcher to Hitler and Stalin and Mao, that's just, no matter how much you hate her, that's a perverse distortion of reality. Margaret Thatcher didn't kill millions of people. Yes, she impacted millions of lives, but she did not kill millions of people in the same way Mao, Stalin and Hitler did. She was not a dictator, she was democratically elected. That's another fact. And these are things that anti-Thatcherites need to accept. Margaret Thatcher was democratically elected. Hate her as much as you want, that is a fact. I think she did divide Britain deeply, and you know, it's the 80s, thank God that period's over. Although under Cameron, where the 2010s is turning out to be a pretty bitter decade as well. So yeah, there's a lot of thoughts I can raise on this issue. Well, another point I'd like to make, a lot of her critics, that their hatred for Toryism and Margaret Thatcher to allow them to come out with some very stupid things like poverty is an excuse for crime. Let's be very clear, it's not. Under no circumstances. You can hate Toryism whilst also having utter contempt for mindless thugs who terrorise their own society. And a lot of socialists, frankly, will blame the Tories for everything. Now, I disagree with that. I don't blame Margaret Thatcher for everything. I think that's a lazy position to take. If a thug chooses to set a car on fire, if a thug mugs an old woman, if a thug mugs people in the street, that is their responsibility. I know you can't blame unemployment. I've struggled with unemployment for a long time. I've never felt that was an excuse to go out and terrorise people. Yes, I felt rage, but there's no excuse for crime, so don't even try it. Because, you know, these people are not, these thugs, the same thugs who were rioting in August 2011, are not representatives of being, they have no moral high ground. As soon as you attack, you know, you loot shops and you burn cars, then you lose all moral credibility. It's just a stupid position to take, and all it does is play into Tory hands. All they're doing is destroying their own communities. They're not attacking the Tories, they're just destroying their own communities, and they're absolute jackasses. And, you know, they're thugs, that's all. They're not political activists, they're thugs. So yeah, this woman was very divisive, and it's impossible in Britain to really have a neutral ground with her. Do I hate her? I don't hate her, no, because I was not, how can I put it? I think I would be a hypocrite to say I hate her, but she wasn't of my generation. I can reflect on her legacy, and I certainly don't like her, but I think a lot of people do jump on the bandwagon, and it was the same with Tony Blair. I don't have much time for people who jump on a political bandwagon without thinking the issues for themselves. Now, there are people of that generation who genuinely hate her. They experienced it, and that's, I won't question that because they suffered under her. But a lot of young people today just say they hate her because their parents do. That's stupid. People need to think for themselves about what they think of this woman, and I'm not going to have to defend myself against anyone for the positions I take. I do believe she was a strong leader on the world stage. I believe on the world stage, in many ways, she was the right leader for Britain. Because I don't believe that someone like Jim Callaghan or Michael Foot or any of the other Labour leaders of that period could have stood up to Soviet communism the way she did. And for that, and that was essential. The Soviet communism enslaved millions of people. And you needed strong democratic leaders to stand up to it. And yes, Margaret Thatcher was a democratic leader. She was democratically elected, as hard as that is to swallow. On the other hand, Thatcherites just demonstrate their utter cold-bloodedness by the refusal to try and grasp why people hate her and why she is so despised. Yes, in some cases it's a generational thing, but they hugely underestimate the very real suffering she caused. You know, in many parts of Britain. So, yeah, Margaret Thatcher, quite a leader. She certainly deserves a place as one of the most prominent leaders of the 20th century. Because, you know, prominent doesn't necessarily mean good or bad, it just means prominent. Chairman Mao was prominent. And look at, but then again, you know, I don't want to give the impression that I'm making any comparisons, because it is absolutely absurd to compare any Western democratic leader with a communist dictator. There's no comparison. Whilst Western leaders have blood on their hands, there's absolutely no comparison with any American president or any British Prime Minister to the rivers of blood spilt by communist dictators, notably Stalin and Mao. It's incomparable. In terms of mortality, it is incomparable. And those who say there is any sort of comparison are just lazy when it comes to academic reality. And I do have contempt for British communists who live in a democratic system, who clearly take this system for granted. These are people who defend North Korea. I have no time for that. And this is why, as much as I hate Toryism, I can't align myself with socialism. And that's why I continue to see myself as a centrist. In China, interestingly enough, she seems to be quite widely respected, despite the fact this is a red country. Quite a number of my students have said that she's respected. Still trying to decipher why exactly. Maybe but she was a strong woman leader, so a lot of girls here maybe look up to her in that sense. I'm sure there'll be other things I can say about Margaret Thatcher, but you know, the bandwidth is 15 minutes, so I'll have to do it. I'll probably allow comments on this video, but anyone who wants to paint me as a Thatcherite, or alternatively a socialist, you can go to hell, because I'm neither. Okay, thank you for watching.